Somewhere in the world, at this very moment, a person is sitting alone at a party, saying almost nothing, and everyone in the room thinks something is wrong with them. Quiet. Awkward. Maybe even a little rude. But here's what nobody in that room realizes. That person's brain is doing something that most people's brains simply cannot do. And science actually backs this up. This video is going to flip everything you think you know about smart behavior completely upside down. Because it turns out, some of the habits that people judge the hardest, the ones that get you called lazy, weird, antisocial, even stupid, those are the exact same behaviors that researchers at some of the top universities in the world have directly linked to higher cognitive ability. We're talking about 6 specific micro-behaviors. Things like forgetting people's names 5 seconds after meeting them, choosing to be alone instead of hanging out with friends, laughing at jokes that make everyone else uncomfortable, changing your opinion so often people think you don't stand for anything, hating small talk like it physically hurts, and getting a random song stuck in your head that just won't go away. All 6 of these look like flaws. Every single one. But they're not. And by the end of this, you're not just going to understand what those behaviors are really doing inside your brain. You're going to start recognizing them in yourself and in the people around you. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll never judge someone the same way again. More importantly, you'll stop judging yourself for doing things that, honestly, your brain might be doing for a very good reason. Here's the thing about this topic that made it personal. A few years back, there was a kid, couldn't have been older than 15, sitting in the back of a classroom, staring out the window. Teacher called on him 3 times. Nothing. Just gone. Completely zoned out. The whole class laughed. Teacher wrote him off. Labeled him a daydreamer, not paying attention, not trying. That kid ended up scoring in the top 1% on every standardized test that year. Top 1%. And nobody saw it coming, because everybody was too busy judging the one behavior that actually revealed what his brain was capable of. That story stuck around for a long time, and it kept showing up again and again, in different forms, different people, different situations. People getting written off for habits that, when you actually dig into the research, turn out to be markers of something most people completely miss. And it was the 4th behavior on this list, changing your mind all the time, the one that honestly sounds the most ridiculous, that finally made the whole pattern click. Once you hear why that one is actually a sign of intelligence, everything else falls into place. But you have to get there first. Let's start with the one that happens to almost everybody but nobody talks about. Forgetting names. You meet someone, they say their name, you shake hands, and 3 seconds later, it's completely gone. Vanished. Like it was never there. And the worst part is, you were paying attention. You were looking them in the eye. You heard the name. It just didn't stick. Most people feel embarrassed about this. They think it means they don't care, or they're not sharp enough, or something in their memory is broken. Society has basically trained everyone to believe that forgetting a name is one of the rudest things you can do. It means you weren't listening. It means that person didn't matter enough to you. But here's the thing about how memory actually works. The brain doesn't store information the way a filing cabinet does. It's not like there's a drawer labeled names, and every time someone introduces themselves, the brain neatly files it away in alphabetical order. That's not even close to what happens. What actually happens is the brain runs a constant, unconscious cost-benefit analysis on every single piece of information it encounters. Every second, every interaction, every conversation, and it makes a decision. Is this worth keeping, or is this noise? And names, as it turns out, are almost always classified as noise. Not because the person doesn't matter, but because a name, by itself, carries almost 0 useful information. Think about it. The name John tells the brain nothing about who this person is, what they do, what they believe, or how they connect to anything else already stored in memory. It's an isolated data point with no context, no meaning, no hooks to attach to. And the brain knows this, so it dumps it. Not out of disrespect, out of efficiency. Researchers who study memory at major universities have found something fascinating. People with higher general intelligence tend to be worse at retaining isolated, context-free details, but significantly better at retaining patterns, systems, and abstract connections. Their brains are literally optimized for big-picture processing at the expense of surface-level detail. It's not a bug. It's the architecture doing exactly what it's designed to do. The brain is prioritizing depth over labels. There was a guy, a professor actually, who was known across his entire department for being one of the most brilliant minds in his field. Published dozens of papers. Could explain unbelievably complex theories off the top of his head. But he could not, for the life of him, remember the name of the barista he saw every single morning for 2 years. Every day. Same coffee shop. Same person. And every day he'd walk in and say, "Hey, you!" His colleagues used to joke about it. But the thing nobody joked about was the fact that this same man could recall the core argument of a research paper he'd read once, 8 years ago, and explain how it connected to 3 other papers from completely different fields. His brain wasn't forgetting. It was choosing. And what it chose to keep was far more valuable than a name tag. So the next time you blank on someone's name mid-conversation and feel that little sting of shame, consider the possibility that your brain just has bigger priorities. It's not broken. It's busy. But forgetting names is a social thing. It happens around people. What about the behavior that pulls you away from people entirely? Because that one gets judged even harder. Preferring to be alone. This is the one that really gets under people's skin. Not yours. Theirs. Because when someone consistently chooses solitude over socializing, the world doesn't just notice. It diagnoses. You're antisocial. You're depressed. You have no friends. You think you're better than everyone. The labels come fast, and they come from everywhere. Family, coworkers, even strangers who barely know you. In a culture that treats extroversion like a personality gold standard, choosing to be alone feels almost rebellious. Like you're breaking some unwritten social contract that says you're supposed to want to be around people all the time. But here's the thing about solitude that most people completely misunderstand. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. Not even close. Loneliness is the feeling that something is missing. Solitude is the feeling that nothing is. And research backs this up in a way that might surprise a lot of people. A study published in the British Journal of Psychology looked at the relationship between intelligence, social interaction, and life satisfaction. What they found was striking. For most people, more frequent socialization with friends led to higher life satisfaction. Makes sense, right? Humans are social creatures. More connection, more happiness. Pretty straightforward. But for people with higher intelligence, the pattern reversed. The more they socialized, the less satisfied they felt. And the more time they spent alone, the happier they reported being. The researchers called this the savanna theory of happiness, the idea that our brains evolved for life on the ancestral savanna, where small, tight-knit groups were essential for survival. Most people still carry that wiring, but people with higher cognitive ability have essentially outgrown it. Their brains have adapted past the need for constant social input, and they actually function better with less of it. This doesn't mean intelligent people hate other people. It means their brains require a different kind of fuel. Solitude gives the brain space to process, to make connections, to think without interruption. Every conversation, every social interaction requires cognitive resources. Listening, responding, reading body language, managing impressions. It's not nothing. It's work. And for a brain that's already running complex processes in the background, that work can feel more draining than it does for someone whose brain isn't carrying the same load. There was a woman who worked at a major tech company. Brilliant engineer. Everyone acknowledged it. But every Friday while the whole team went out for drinks, she went home. Every time. Without exception. For months, people assumed she didn't like them. Some thought she was arrogant. A few felt offended. Then one day, during a product crisis that had the entire engineering team stumped for 2 weeks, she walked in on a Monday morning with a solution. A complete, elegant, deeply thought-out fix that nobody else had even come close to. When someone asked her how she figured it out, she said she'd spent the weekend thinking. Just thinking. No distractions, no noise, no Friday drinks, just her and the problem. And the problem lost. That's what solitude does for certain brains. It's not avoidance. It's fuel. But if preferring to be alone gets you judged, the next one gets you something worse. It gets you that look. The uncomfortable, what is wrong with you look. Laughing at dark humor. This is the one people are most afraid to admit. Because laughing when you're supposed to feel something else Shock, sadness, discomfort. That's a social landmine. Someone makes a joke about death or tragedy or something that sits right on the edge of acceptable. And while everyone else is either silent or forcing a polite grimace, one person laughs, really laughs. And instantly, every eye in the room turns. Not with curiosity, with judgment. What kind of person laughs at that? Turns out a smart one. A study conducted at the Medical University of Vienna tested participants' reactions to dark humor, specifically jokes that dealt with death, disease, and misfortune. They measured not just whether people found the jokes funny, but their overall cognitive ability, emotional stability, and aggression levels. The results were not what most people would expect. The group that appreciated dark humor the most, the ones who genuinely found it funny rather than just shocking, scored significantly higher on both verbal and nonverbal intelligence tests. They also showed lower levels of aggression and higher emotional stability. Read that again. Lower aggression, higher stability. The opposite of what the stereotype suggests. Here's why this makes sense from a cognitive perspective. Dark humor requires the brain to do something incredibly complex in a very short amount of time. It has to process the literal meaning of the joke. Then it has to recognize the violation, the part that breaks social or moral expectations. Then, and this is the key, it has to reframe that violation as non-threatening. That reframing is what produces the laugh. And that reframing requires significant cognitive processing power. A brain that can do all of that in milliseconds, smoothly and without getting stuck on the emotional content, is a brain that's operating at a high level. People with lower cognitive ability tend to get stuck at step 2. They process the violation but can't make the jump to reframing. So, the joke just feels offensive, disturbing, wrong. Not because they're more moral or more sensitive, but because their brains can't complete the full processing loop fast enough for humor to emerge. The cognitive load is too high. Think of it like this. Dark humor is a stress test for the brain. It throws something unexpected and emotionally charged at you and then measures whether you can catch it, flip it, and land on your feet. People who can do that aren't cold or heartless. They're cognitively flexible. And cognitive flexibility is one of the strongest markers of general intelligence that researchers have identified. There was a study participant. The researchers never released names, but the profile was notable. This person scored the highest on both the intelligence measures and the dark humor appreciation scale. During the post-study interview, they said something that stuck with the researchers. They said they'd always felt guilty about finding certain things funny, like something was broken inside them. They'd spent years trying to suppress it in social situations, and then they read the study results and realized, for the first time, that their brain wasn't broken. It was just fast. Pretty clever, right? But also kind of tragic. Because the thing about dark humor is that the people who are wired for it almost never feel safe showing it. They learn to hide. They learn to match the room. And they carry this quiet belief that something about them is off, when really, something about them is ahead. And speaking of brains that process differently, this is something that actually became personal. Because a while back, after spending months diving into research like this, research on how intelligent brains work, how they process, what makes them different, there was this frustrating realization. All this information existed, scattered across dozens of studies, buried in academic papers that nobody reads, and none of it was organized into something you could actually use. Like, great, now you know your brain works differently. Now what? What do you actually do with that? How do you take a brain that's already wired for depth and give it the systems to operate at full capacity instead of just running in the background without direction? That frustration is exactly why the Sharp Mind Blueprint exists. 7 evidence-based systems, pulled directly from cognitive science research, designed to help you think clearer, faster, and sharper. Not theory, not motivation. Actual systems. Before putting this together, the research was everywhere, but the application was nowhere. After building these systems and testing them, the difference was night and day. Problems that used to sit in the back of the mind for weeks started resolving in hours. Decision-making got faster. Mental fog that used to creep in by mid-afternoon just stopped showing up. And if any of what you've heard so far in this video made you think, that sounds like me, then honestly, this was built for you. Check the pinned comment for the link. See if it fits where you are right now. But let's keep going. Because the next behavior on this list is the one that drives everyone around you absolutely crazy. At least with humor, you can hold the laugh in. The next one plays out in public, in real time, and there's no way to fake it. But at least with humor, you can hide it. You can hold the laugh in. The next behavior is one you can't fake at all, because it plays out in public, in real time, and it drives everyone around you absolutely crazy. Changing your mind, often, about things that matter. This is the one that people have the hardest time forgiving. Because in most cultures, changing your mind is weakness. It's flip-flopping. It's not knowing who you are. Strong people pick a position and stick with it. They plant their flag in the ground and they don't move. That's character. That's conviction. That's leadership. And anyone who constantly shifts their views, who says one thing on Monday and something different by Thursday, well, that person clearly can't be trusted. They don't know what they believe. They're wishy-washy, unreliable, soft. Except, here's the thing about that narrative. It's completely dangerously wrong. And the science on this is about as clear as it gets. Research on cognitive flexibility, which is the brain's ability to update its models when new information arrives, shows a direct and consistent correlation with higher intelligence. The smarter the person, the more willing they are to change their position when presented with better evidence. Not because they're uncertain, but because they're processing. Constantly. Their brains don't treat beliefs as identity. They treat beliefs as hypotheses. And a hypothesis, by definition, is something you're supposed to test, challenge, and revise. The psychologist Philip Tetlock spent decades studying prediction accuracy, basically trying to figure out who's good at predicting the future and who's terrible at it. His research, which involved tens of thousands of predictions across hundreds of experts, found something remarkable. The single biggest predictor of accuracy wasn't education, wasn't experience, wasn't access to information. It was willingness to update. The people who changed their minds the most were right the most. And the people who clung to their original positions, the ones who looked strong and decisive, they were wrong the most, consistently, across every domain. Think about what that means. The behavior that society punishes, the one that gets you called unreliable, is actually the behavior most associated with seeing reality clearly. And the behavior that society rewards, the unshakable conviction, the I know what I believe stance, is the one most associated with being wrong. The world literally has it backwards. There was a CEO, ran a mid-sized company, and he used to drive his board of directors insane. Because he'd walk into a meeting with a clear position, lay it out, and then, mid-discussion, if someone made a compelling counterpoint, he'd pause and say, "You know what? I think I was wrong." Right there, in front of everyone. His board hated it. They wanted certainty. They wanted a leader who didn't flinch. Some of them openly questioned whether he was fit to run the company. Then the numbers came in. Year after year after year, his strategic decisions outperformed industry averages by a wide margin. And when a journalist finally asked him about his decision-making process, he said something that should be printed on every wall in every boardroom in the world. He said, "The moment I fall in love with my own idea is the moment I stop seeing the better one." That's not weakness. That's a supercomputer running real-time updates, and most people are too stuck on looking strong to ever do it. But here's the irony. People who change their mind often are also the people who tend to hate the one social ritual that everyone else seems to love. And that takes us to the next one. Hating small talk. Oh, this one hits different, because small talk is everywhere. It's the glue of polite society. It's how people navigate offices, elevators, checkout lines, family gatherings, and literally every social situation that involves more than 2 seconds of eye contact. Nice weather we're having. How about that game last night? Busy week? It's expected. It's normal. And for some people, it's absolute torture. Not mildly annoying. Not slightly boring. Genuinely painful. Like there's a part of their brain that physically resists engaging in a conversation that isn't going anywhere. And that's exactly what's happening. Research on conversational preferences and cognitive engagement has shown that people with higher intelligence tend to derive almost no satisfaction from surface-level exchanges. Their brains are wired for depth, for meaning, for conversations that actually go somewhere and connect to something. Small talk doesn't activate the reward centers of their brain the way it does for most people. Instead, it feels like running a high-performance engine in first gear. The engine isn't broken. It's just not built for this. A study published in Psychological Science found that people who reported higher levels of happiness and life satisfaction had one thing in common in their conversational habits. They had fewer small-talk conversations and significantly more substantive, deep conversations. The researchers measured this by attaching recording devices to participants for 4 days and analyzing every conversation they had. The happiest people weren't necessarily talking more, they were talking deeper. And the correlation held even after controlling for personality type, meaning this wasn't just an introvert-extrovert thing, it was a depth of processing thing. Here's why this makes sense. Small talk requires the brain to operate in a mode that intelligent people find fundamentally unsatisfying. It's performative. There's no real information being exchanged, no problems being solved, no ideas being explored. The brain has to suppress its natural drive toward depth and instead just repeat patterns. I'm good. How are you? Can't complain. Living the dream. It's a social script, and highly intelligent brains don't run well on scripts. They run on novelty, complexity, and genuine exchange. There was a researcher spent her whole career studying communication patterns, and she once described small talk as the cognitive equivalent of junk food, briefly satisfying for some, completely unfulfilling for others, and ultimately carrying very little nutritional value for the brain. She pointed out that the people who struggle most with small talk aren't the ones who lack social skills. They're often the ones who have the most to say, but can't find the right conversation to say it in. They're not antisocial. They're anti-shallow. And that realization changes the entire framing. The person at the office who seems cold because they don't engage in water cooler chat might just be the person whose brain is already 3 levels deep into a problem nobody else has noticed yet. They're not avoiding you. They're somewhere else. Somewhere their brain actually wants to be. Makes sense, right? But the last behavior on this list is the strangest one of all. Because it doesn't seem like it has anything to do with intelligence. It seems random, annoying, maybe even a little maddening. Getting songs stuck in your head. Everyone's experienced this. You hear a song in the morning, maybe just a few seconds of it, and then it's there. On loop. For hours. Sometimes days. Playing the same melody, the same chorus, the same 3 lines over and over and over again in the background of your mind like a radio you can't turn off. Most people find it irritating. Some find it genuinely distressing. And almost nobody thinks of it as a sign of anything positive. It's just a glitch, right? A brain hiccup. A piece of mental lint that got stuck in the filter. But here's the thing about those mental loops that researchers have been studying for years, and the findings are genuinely fascinating. The phenomenon is called an involuntary musical imagery, and it happens when the brain latches onto a piece of music and replays it internally without any conscious effort. Scientists used to think it was random, just a misfiring of the auditory cortex. But more recent research has shown that it's actually linked to the structure and activity level of the brain itself. A study from Goldsmiths, University of London, found that people who experience more frequent and more vivid earworms tend to have thicker cortical regions in the areas of the brain associated with auditory processing, memory, and emotional regulation. In other words, the brains that get songs stuck in them the most are brains with more neural real estate dedicated to complex processing. The earworm isn't the symptom of a glitch. It's the symptom of a brain that's running more processes than average and has enough bandwidth to maintain a background audio loop while still functioning normally. Think about what that actually means. A regular brain hears a song and moves on. A more active brain hears a song and keeps processing it, unconsciously, in the background, while simultaneously doing everything else it needs to do. It's like a computer that can run a music player in the background without slowing down any of the programs running in the foreground. That's not a flaw. That's processing power. Other research has connected the frequency of earworms to higher levels of creativity and working memory capacity. Working memory is the brain's ability to hold and manipulate multiple pieces of information simultaneously, and it's one of the strongest individual predictors of general intelligence. People with larger working memory capacity don't just hold more information, they process it in more complex ways. And one of the side effects of that complexity is that musical patterns, which are essentially mathematical sequences wrapped in sound, get caught in the gears. The brain is running so many parallel processes that catchy melodic patterns get swept up in the current and just keep circulating. There was a musician, a classically trained pianist, who said something about this that perfectly captures the experience. She said the songs that got stuck in her head were never random. They were always connected to something she was working through, an emotion, a memory, a problem she hadn't solved yet. The earworm was her brain's way of keeping a channel open, of running background processing on something that hadn't been fully resolved. She stopped trying to get rid of them and started paying attention to them. And when she did, she noticed patterns. The songs that showed up during stressful weeks were different from the ones that showed up during creative breakthroughs. Her brain was essentially communicating with her through music, and once she started listening, she realized it had been doing it her entire life. And that might be the most important takeaway from this entire list. Every one of these 6 behaviors, forgetting names, wanting to be alone, laughing at dark things, changing your mind, hating small talk, getting songs stuck in your head, every single one of them shares the same root cause. A brain that's doing more than most, processing more, connecting more, running more background operations than the average mind can handle. And because those behaviors don't fit the mold of what society considers smart, they get mislabeled, they get judged, they get shamed. But the research says something very different from what the social judgment says. The research says these are the fingerprints of a high-functioning brain. Not flaws to fix, not quirks to suppress, signals to recognize. And the tragedy isn't that these behaviors exist. The tragedy is that most people who have them spend their entire lives believing something is wrong with them, when the truth is almost the exact opposite. So the next time you forget someone's name and feel that familiar wave of embarrassment, or you choose to stay home instead of going out and catch yourself wondering if you're too antisocial, or you laugh at something nobody else finds funny and feel that quick flash of shame, remember this: your brain isn't broken. It's just running on different hardware. And the people who built the world, the ones who solved the problems nobody else could see, the ones who created things that changed everything, they had the exact same glitches. Every single one of them. The question was never whether those behaviors were flaws. The question was always whether anyone would look close enough to see what they really were. Remember that kid from the beginning? The one staring out the window, getting laughed at by the whole class, written off by the teacher as a daydreamer? He wasn't broken. He was processing. And nobody in that room had the framework to see it. But now you do. You just spent this entire video building that framework, piece by piece. And if at any point you caught yourself thinking, wait, that's me, then you already know what this really means. Your brain isn't glitching. It never was. And look, everything in this video, every study, every behavior, every pattern, it all points to the same thing. There are brains out there running on different hardware, and most of them have never been given the right systems to match. That's exactly what the Sharp Mind Blueprint was built for. Not to fix what's broken, because nothing is broken, but to give a brain that already works differently the structure to work at its full capacity. If this video felt like someone finally explained something you've been carrying your whole life, then that blueprint is the next step. Check the pinned comment for the link. Now here's what would actually make a difference. Drop a comment and tell me which of these 6 behaviors hit the hardest for you. Which one made you stop and think, I've been judging myself for this my entire life? Because those comments, those stories you share down there, that's where the real conversations happen. And a lot of what ends up in these videos starts right there. If someone came to mind while you were watching this, someone who's always been told they're too quiet, too weird, too much in their own head, send them this video. Sometimes the thing a person needs most is just to hear that their brain isn't the problem. Subscribe if you want to keep going with this. Every week, we dig into another piece of how the mind actually works. Not the version people sell you, the real one. See you in the next one.